Okay, let's begin. So welcome to Resilient You, our mini university on cultivating resilience. And so whether it's helping people on their job search journey, keep their spirits up, keep committed to moving forward and not getting bogged down, or helping them perform well on the job, the techniques and guiding principles and practices we'll be talking about will help the people you work with. So to get us started, I want to play this video. How many of you know the People Are Awesome series? Okay, you're in for a treat. So as I play this video, I want you to be thinking, hopefully you enjoy it, but I also want you to be thinking about what does this video have to do with resilience, number one, and number two, why am I playing it other than just that reason? So people are awesome. In one of the comments section, or one of the comments in the comment section, YouTube, somebody said, instead of people are awesome, it should be people are insane. I think that last one. So in groups of threes or fours, whatever works for you, how does this relate to resilience? And then over and above that, why do we start off with this video? So we'll do 3 minutes and then we'll come back together. Whoops. So what does this have to do with resilience? What'd you come up with? Yes, Lee.
Well, there's nobody that did that for the first time, second time, or 100th time and did it successfully. So they have to have been able to withstand a lot of failures before they were able to be successful.
So fantastic. So what Carolyn Dweck calls the growth mindset, how many of you are aware of her research? You got it. So as they fail in the beginning, it's not like I'm a big loser, I can never do. It's like, no, that's just part of the learning process. So as you think about coaching people, help them realize they'll probably bomb their first interview. You don't want to program that in, but they won't be superstars. Okay, great. What else? Oh, somebody over here? How does this relate to resilience?
In that composure.
Absolutely, and that's one of the big takeaways, and we'll go to in a moment about the importance of resilience, because when you're resilient, you can perform at your best in high-pressure situations. And even though we have a certain we come into the world with a certain level of resilience. In fact, you can even breed strains of rats and mice that have innate resilience levels. Whatever your beginning point in resilience is, you can increase it. What else did you notice about? Yes. So also kind of related to they didn't start off this way, and some of the things that they do, like the guy skiing off the mountain and all that, crazy stuff, what for most of us would be terrifying, for them is exciting. And we'll revisit that in a moment. So let's talk about resilience, because even though I'm sure everybody in here has a sense of what it is, I think when it's useful to break it into its component parts, because not only does it sharpen our focus on what resilience is, it also gives us an idea of practices that increase resilience, again, regardless of where a person starts from. So typically when people think about resilience, they think about the ability to bounce back from adversity. That's kind of the common way of thinking of it, whether it's a major life event or, let's say, this poor person, they're not getting the call back for the second step of the job interview. It's also the ability to not sweat the small stuff. If you work with people like that. And one of the things that's really fascinating to me is the neurobiology and the psychophysiology or psychobiology of resilience, and how you can breed strains of mice and rats that are resilient or not resilient, whether it's lab mice or lab rats or human beings. Some sweat the small stuff and overreact to any little potential stressor, and others are like, that's not a big deal, there's no physiological response. And resilient individuals are able to marshal their resources when it is big stuff. So they're able to perform under pressure in difficult situations, and not just open heart surgery, but work that's called emotional labor. So you think about this, the lady here on the right, her ability to provide compassionate, caring care at the end of the day, as much as she is in the beginning of the day, or Friday afternoon as she is able to Monday morning, is hugely dependent on her resilience level. It's also our ability to be Gumby-like, to respond flexibly to change. Oh, I'm sorry. I shouldn't say always. Oftentimes I forget to say, if you want the slides, you can have the slides. Okay? So we'll do that later. But I encourage you to jot down notes. I love heavy-duty learners. Ideas that come up for you. And again, you can have the slides. So it's not just being flexible, it's being nimble. Quick story. Years ago, I was interviewed by some radio station on stress in the workplace. And I had been warned and I was pretty new in the field, by seasoned people in the field, that oftentimes interviewers, they'll act like you're their BFF before you go on the air, and then once you're on the air, they go for the jugular. And sure enough, so before it's like very solicitous, like, wow, this is really fascinating stuff you're doing, all that. As soon as we get on the air, his opening question was, he frames it this way, he says, so Mr. Lee, you're an expert on stress in the workplace, and everybody's talking about stress in America, but are we really just a nation of babies and whiners? Well, let the games begin. And what I said to him was not what I was thinking. No, what I said to him was, yes, like not maybe, but our ancestors had unbelievably challenging lives. But what it took to handle those was that sort of stoic, able to grind it out day in and day out. And it's kind of like being a river barge or a tugboat, like untippable in rough seas. Whereas in today's world, we need to be durable but also nimble, like a whitewater kayak. So I love to use surfing as an analogy. Any fellow surfers here? All right, way to go. Yeah. So I love surfing because it's a great metaphor for resilience. And so for this guy here, he finds this size wave exciting, whereas for me, that would be both terrifying and an end-of-life experience. So here I am living the dream that is surfing in May. Best waves are in the winter. Let me go back to him. And so you don't get to that level of being able to handle the big waves without cultivating mental toughness, physical conditioning, skill development, etc. And it's the same thing with us in all aspects of life. So whether it's handling setbacks in a job search, whether it's getting the courage to have a really difficult conversation, whatever it is, it's that combination of sort of like the mental game and the skill set, and also developing the physiology that supports resilience. So actually we'll go. Oh, okay. Watch what he does. He's got 2 surfboards. Who does that? Way to go, Jamie. Okay. So you think about, he's doing some amazing trick, again, on a wave that would kill me. So here's what we're going to cover. Well, we actually just covered what resilience is, really briefly where this comes from, why it's so important to understand the mind-body connection, and then we'll talk about some techniques for doing it. The number one way to boost resilience, based on some really fascinating research, what elite athletes know that we all need to know, okay? And I might pull this out, I'm not sure yet, accessing the power of the why. And 2 of my favorite tools, because I really want to give you these tools before we leave. Okay. So where does this come from? I'm not going to turn this into a real long, let me tell you about me, have you fall asleep. That being said, I've been involved both personally and professionally in the stress management and resilience field for quite a bit more than 30 years now. I used to be a counselor, and I worked with trauma survivors. And that really sparked my interest in resilience in terms of how can one traumatic event change somebody forever, and how is it that some people bounce back, some don't? How do you help people become more resilient? And then when I left that field and I started working in the corporate world, it was more how stress affects the brain and how that prevents employees performing at their best. But what started it all for me was a personal experience that I had. That it was a summer job that absolutely changed my life. And what it was a summer of my sophomore year. And I was living away from home. I was putting myself through school. Those of you who did that know that's shorthand for I was very poor. And I didn't have a car, couldn't afford a car, so I hitchhiked everywhere, which is kind of a drag. And so I was working basic minimum wage jobs. There's no way I could afford a car. Well, a classmate of mine told me about a job he had the summer before, which he made 3 times of what I did working on the farm. So I'm like, sign me up. And what the job was selling books door to door. Fortunately, I didn't think this one through really carefully, because if I had, I never would have done it. And the reason why, I was so painfully shy and my self-image was so fragile, I would not smile at a clerk at the grocery store, because if they didn't smile back, I would feel crushed. Yeah, trust me, having somebody not smile at you when you sell books door to door, least of your worries. And so I grew up in Connecticut, went to UConn. A bunch of us from UConn drove down to Nashville, Tennessee, where how many of you ever had kids from the Southwestern Company? Like they sell education books. Yeah, okay. That's right. I didn't realize that. Okay, yeah. So I was one of those poor saps. So we go down to, and they've been doing it for like over 100 years. Yeah, it's like a really long-standing company. So we go down to Nashville, Tennessee. We learn our little sales stuff, and then we hop in a Ford Maverick. How many of you remember the? Oh, yeah. You had one? Stellar set of wheels. Hop in the Ford Maverick. Drive up to Fort Wayne, Indiana. Anybody live in Fort Wayne, Indiana?
All the hot spots. Huh?
Yeah, right, thank you. I usually say fun capital of the world. I didn't at the last conference, thankfully, because the guy goes like, oh, I grew up there. I'm like, okay, good. Trust me, it's not the fun capital of the world. So we arrive there. So again, low self-image, scared of people. We arrive there. We have no place to stay. Yeah, and we promise the company that we will start selling our books bright and early Monday morning. It's Saturday morning. So the company had given us 2 names to reach out to. People said, if your kids come selling, like, call us. So I call up one, and it's a minister. Say, like, you mentioned that you'd be willing to, like, maybe put up, students, and he says, like, oh, I don't have a place, but you could talk to, I think it was his son-in-law. And we're like, sweet. So we call up the son-in-law, and he sounds a little like, okay, you can come over. So we're wondering, why not the welcome mat? Well, we get there, and it turns out it's a halfway house. And we were so desperate, we're like, sign us up. So imagine, even though I was living alone, I'd lived a pretty sheltered life, and suddenly I'm living in a halfway house, selling books door to door, Fort Wayne, Indiana. And I was so terrified. I grew up in a very, like a rural, like working class kind of area, very small houses and everything. And the first housing development was like big fancy houses. Never saw like houses like that before. I could still remember like knocking at the door. This is back when people were still at home during the day. And I knock on the door, and I swear it's like, a lady comes. And I was so frightened, I totally forgot my sales talk, and I just went like this. Just showed her the book. And that started my illustrious summer job. And I actually, not only did I make enough to buy a car, Datsun 510, any of these? Yeah, there we go, Datsun 510. But it absolutely changed my life. Absolutely. And even though I was still a shy kid, and at the time I wanted to be a wildlife biologist, it actually planted the seed of wanting to do something that helped people. But it also taught me resilience before I knew the term, and that there's sort of like 2 ways of not being fearful in life, there's the hide from anything that's challenging approach, which was my go-to back then, or there's like the stepping outside your comfort zone, day in and day out, and learning the mental tools that help support you stepping outside your comfort zone, day in and day out. So by the end of the summer, things that in the past would have like put me in the corner in the fetal position, now it's like, bring it on. And interestingly enough, after only a few years back in college, a few months back in college, I started to backslide. I became less and less resilient because I wasn't practicing the tools that I'd used that summer. So school is never out with any of this. Okay. Let's talk about the mind-body connection. So I'm sure you've all had this experience. So this is me, but not me, representing me. So I remember like slogging through the airport. I think it was Cincinnati Airport. And you know that feeling, especially at the end of a trip, and you're worn out, and you're breathing airplane air and and I'm just dragging along, and I'm thinking of my big to-do list and all that I've got to do. And when you're tired and maybe you don't feel well, it's just everything that you're facing seems big and overwhelming. And then suddenly off to the right, there it is. And so I run over. This is back in the day when I would order venti espresso drinks that have 4 shots of espresso. and so I chug that down. And, within like a minute, I suddenly am like this. And it's so funny because I'm like, you know how it is if you have like too much caffeine? You're like, I could do this, I could do that, like that. It's like become so manicky. And you think about it, what changed? Nothing in the outside world changed. My responsibilities, my to-do list didn't change. I didn't even engage in any productive self-talk. It was only my physiology. My body changed. And so back in the day when I was involved in the mind-body medicine field, one of the things that always bothered me is most practitioners always talked about how the mind affects the body, and not enough were talking about how the body affects the mind. And so the more skilled we are, we're going to talk more about how to do that, about helping ourselves get into an energized state and helping the people you work with get in an energized state. Not only do they perform better, actually, let me just show you this. Let me just say this and then I'll finish that up. Our nervous system needs to be in a specific physiological state, promote bold ideas, creativity, and positive social behavior. Dr. Stephen Porges, we'll revisit him later, has fascinating research on the #1 way to build resilience. So you think about if your clients are feeling overwhelmed, or let's say they're just not getting enough sleep and they're worn out, they're not going to have bold ideas about who to reach out to or career possibilities. They're not going to be creative in their thought process, and they're not going to present as well in networking events, informational interviews, and real interviews. So this is something that elite athletes know. Your state determines your performance. So anything and everything we can do to get into an empowered state makes all the difference in the world. How many of you are familiar with Amy Cuddy's work? Yeah, doesn't she rock? You got it. Highly recommend Amy Cuddy. So just one bit of research that she talks about that is definitely relevant to your clients is how actually, I'll just back up for a second. So one of the areas of inquiry that's really fascinating to Amy Cuddy is how our body movement and body posture affects our emotional state and therefore how we show up in the world. And so one of the bits of research that she did was have people assume a power posture. So like this, she calls it the Wonder Woman look. So if you've ever seen Wonder Woman, okay, you know what we're talking about. And then what they would do, so one group would hold that position for 2 minutes, and the other group would be like all collapsed into themselves. Okay? And then what they would do is they would go in for an interview. And the interviewers didn't know anything about what happened before then. And those that assumed the power posture were perceived as more competent, obviously more confident, and I can't remember, a bunch of other really good things. And only 2 minutes, what it did is it would raise testosterone and lower cortisol. Raise testosterone. So cortisol is the biochemical of despair and hopelessness. Okay? Recommend Amy Cuddy's TED Talk. And also you get to see the amazing Haka, Amy Cuddy fans, you know the Haka, the New Zealand, your New Zealand connection, yeah, the New Zealand rugby team. Okay, next steps. And again, you'll get this in the slide. I mean, you'll get the slides, those of you who want it. Actually, I'll do this now. If you have a card, you could just do the card. If you don't, you could just do name and email. So next steps, learn more about the mind-body connection. Pay attention to what activities, self-talk, music, and people boost your energy and what ones drain you. So this morning as I was working out, I love both like intense music, but I get really energized by learning. So this morning I was watching Adam Grant video. I love Adam Grant, he's awesome. And as I was watching that and working out, I found myself thinking about things to share with you. Okay? Help your clients do the same. And help your clients shift into a more empowered state when you're working with them. And if this was a longer version, we would actually do this as an exercise. But here's what I recommend that you do, is first off, share with them a story that is what I call if I could do that, I can do this story. So my story about selling books is a reference experience in my life where I'm sort of scared to do something like, hello, if I could sell books door to door as a scared kid, I can do this. So here's the process to get them in a more empowered state, okay? So let's say you're trying to have them think about possibilities and they're all collapsed into themselves and like, oh, there's nothing I can do, there's no options. There's no way they're going to be expansive in their thought process in this physiology, okay? And so one of the things you could do is say, hey, I want to give you an example of, a lot of times we can do things that we never think is possible. And share your own example from your own life about something that you didn't think you could do it and you did it. Or maybe you were hoping you could do it and you did it and you think, man, if I could do that, I could do this. Okay? So you share that first. And what that does is it primes their subconscious mind to start thinking about their own version of that in their own life, and then ask them, so that's an example of my life. When's a situation in your own life where you didn't think you could do something and you did? Or you're thinking like, man, if I could do that, I could do this. As they tell you that, it shifts their emotional and physiological state to that power pose, so to speak, and now in that state, remember state determines performance, they start thinking more creatively. They start seeing possibilities. Okay, so that's a kind of a pro tip. So that's why the mind-body connection. The number one way to boost resilience. This comes from one of my personal faves, Dr. Jane McGonigal. Lots of fantastic TED Talks. Really cool lady. PhD, I think it's in game design, if I remember correctly. But anyway, she's a rock star in the game field. So video games. And here's what happened to her. She got a concussion. It's so funny because she said, I'd love to say it was in a sports accident, but it was actually getting up in the kitchen and hitting my head on the cupboard, so it wasn't quite so glamorous, but still, ouch. And she got a severe concussion where she actually had to be bedridden in her room with the lights out. It was that bad. And she started to develop severe depression. And fortunately, her twin sister, Kelly, is a rock star in the positive psychology field. So between the two of them, they worked out a game plan about how to get her out of the depression. And one of the here's what she started to do. She's like, wait a minute. what about if I treat my recovery like a game? And what do we know about video games and game psychology? And she ended up writing awesome book. Awesome book, Super Better. And she also has a website. It's either superbetter.com or .org. And she created a program based on these principles that people all around the world use to help themselves get out of depression, help themselves develop healthier habits, deal with anxiety, etc. And here's the number one way to boost resilience. And it's based on the concept of power-ups. How many of you play any kind of video games? Okay, okay. So I remember Pac-Man. Was that for a dated reference? But those of you who play Pac-Man, those little magic pellets, that's a power-up. Angry Birds, I guess like some kind of seeds, or a power-up. So a power-up in video games, anything that you acquire that makes you more powerful. Okay. So Jane started thinking, like, what are power-ups in the real world? So here's what I want to ask you to do with a partner. So now we're just going to do partners. To finish the sentence, I feel most alive and happy when, okay. Here are two simple little things in life that boost my mood and are legal. Okay. It would make me a happier camper and maybe even healthier if I started doing such and such again. Okay? So we'll do 2 minutes with your partner, then we'll come back together. So, what you just did is identified some of your power-ups. You identified some of your power-ups. So power-ups are any kinds of activities that boost your mood. And that in and of itself makes them valuable, but it's way more important, intense, and powerful than that. So real-world power-ups are the key to keeping our mood positive and being stress-resistant, aka resilient. So let me tell you a little bit about the science behind it. So remember Stephen Porges? Okay, here he comes back again. The reason why power-ups are so powerful is they strengthen what's called vagal tone. So the vagus nerve, okay? Vagus nerve is sort of like ground zero of the mind-body connection. So how thoughts and beliefs affect the body and how the body translates into thoughts and beliefs and the way we see the world. It's more than just that, though. So look at this, the neurobiology of grace under pressure. 8 habits that stimulate your vagus nerve and keep you calm, cool, and collected. And actually what I'll do for those of you who want the slides, I'll put together a resource page that has links to this and some of my other favorites. So practices so vagal tone basically is how strong your vagus nerve is. It's kind of a simplistic way of saying it. It's how effective your vagus nerve is. And it was really interesting to me because, again, I was involved in the trauma field for many years and in resilience for many years. And I had never, up until recently, I had never been aware of the research on the vagus nerve and how what Stephen Porges' research shows is that he said, let's see if I can capture this well. He said, how badly a traumatic effect, or just like dealing with a difficult person, or like an unpleasant day, how badly it affects a person's emotional and physical well-being is not as much predicted by their coping resources after the fact. It's sort of like how impervious they are, how unshakable they are before the fact. And that's vagal tone. That's vagal tone. Oh, and one way to stimulate, so power-ups strengthen your vagal tone. Also cold showers, okay, strengthen vagal tone. And there's like a gazillion other, and actually I've got a link to another article that has like 20 habits that boost your vagal tone. So strong vagal tone makes you less reactive, So think about your clients where, let's say, somebody asks them a question in an interview and they go blank. And so they don't melt in a puddle of humiliation. If they have strong vagal tone, it's like, okay, didn't do that one well, let's motor on. So less reactive. Also, less affected by difficult people and difficult circumstances. So actually, what happens when you have low vagal tone? Anybody recognize this guy? Hint, Breaking Bad? Tuco, okay. So this is actually a YouTube commercial. Wait till you see, talk about a raw nerve. Take care now, see you later. Well, hey, come back here. Holly told me she'd leave, by the way. Oh. Know somebody like that? And actually watching that reminds me, I forgot to ask you in the large group why I started off with that video. I'm sure for many of you it's quite obvious, wanted to start off in an upbeat mood, with an upbeat mood, something fun, something inspiring, because your ability to focus, your ability to absorb, your ability to connect the dots is related to your emotional state. And so again, anything, because of the mind-body connection, anything and everything you can do in your own life to optimize your emotional state, your physiological state, helps you perform better, and any way you can do that with your clients helps them perform better. Okay. So how to strengthen your vagal tone and build resilience. Here's something that's really fascinating about the research. What they found was what strengthens the vagal tone are microbursts of positive emotions. So just like fun little interaction, a funny little video, a neat song, song that inspires you. It's not orchestrating or waiting for some big uplifting occasion. So it's not like, oh, if I could only go on a fancy vacation, then I will be, resilient. It's those little magic moments throughout the day, the little microbursts. And also what was really interesting to me was what they found is it's also not trying to reduce your negative emotions. So they found that people with high vagal tone didn't have any fewer negative emotions throughout the day. They just had a whole lot more positive. So the takeaway is becoming more mindful of power-ups and helping your clients become more mindful of power-ups. So here's a power-up for me. So this is my little blind rescue dog, Minnie, so hanging out with Minnie. And she's actually a great example of resilience. So even though she's blind, she was a little stray wandering around Sanford, Maine. Even though she's blind, she's like always happy, doesn't slow her down. So hanging out with whether two-legged critters or four-legged critters. So those of you who like animals, here's one of my buddies, Chippy. You can probably guess why he got his name. So what are your power-ups? And actually research shows, actually I'll just play it while we're doing it. Actually research shows that one of the best ones is watching funny animal videos. So nothing says happy better than an otter eating cereal. So you should probably spend hours a day at work watching animal videos. You can just tell your boss that you're being more resilient. Okay, so number one way to boost resilience. So next steps, identify power-ups that work for you, help your clients understand the importance of power-ups, and help them do the same. So what elite athletes know? And this was, I remember years ago when I first came upon this, and actually I want to give credit where credit is due. I first read about it in a book by Dr. James Lair and blanking on his Schwartz's. I'm blanking. Whatever Dr. Schwartz is. Sorry, whatever your first name. I met him and I can't remember his last name. Anyway, we'll stick with Dr. Jim Lair. And when they started working with executives and they described them as corporate athletes, one of the things that they found was executives who were burnt out, executives who had no mojo left, they never did any recovery. They were just 24/7 pedal to the metal. And because they had worked with athletes, they knew that what athletes do, take care now. Oh no, that's no worries. You got to do what you got to do. Yeah. They knew what athletes know is the importance of the challenge recovery cycle. The importance of the challenge recovery. Those of you, how many of you lift weights? Okay. And you don't lift the same weights every day, right? Let's say you do curls every day. What happens if you did that?
Nothing.
Well, actually worse than nothing. Your muscles would get damaged. You'd injure yourself. You'd actually would get weaker. In fact, I remember when I first started really getting into fitness, a fitness guru, and it might have been, oh, it's not him. He'll come up later. Might have been not this guy. He said something like, it's better to undertrain by 20% than overtrain by 5%. And so excessive training, more is not always better. So this is the guy I was thinking about. Recovery is king, exercise is queen. And so I believe one of the big reasons why so many people have low energy, why so many people aren't resilient, is they're not doing enough recovery. And so one of the most useful things you can do for yourself and teach your clients is both micro recovery and macro recovery. So let me give you mini recovery or micro recovery moments. So research shows that if somebody's doing a particular task and they start to get fatigued, if they switch to another task, their energy rises. And I bet some of you have noticed that with yourself, like I can't do another whatever it is, and you just know something else and you're jazzed up again. So being mindful of energy level and switching tasks. Watching a funny or inspiring video. Take a brief defocus break every 60 to 90 minutes. There's a book called Open Focus Mind, and it's by, I think it's a neurologist, where you couldn't stay away? No, thanks for coming. So, open focus mind, and one of the things he talks about, and think about how true this is, in today's world, we are hyper-focused all the time. You know, we've got the furrowed brow, and we're like looking at the Excel spreadsheets and all that we have to do. And when the brain is always hyper-focused in that sort of tunnel vision, mind-body connection, what kind of emotional state is associated with tunnel vision? Stressed out state, fight or flight. And so even if we're not necessarily stressed out, if we're always like focused, it's telling the brain we're stressed out. And so that's why he's got this whole protocol about learning to meditate as opposed to a hyper-focused way that oftentimes meditation is, to meditate with a more expanded focus. And he's got all kinds of cool clinical examples of how that helps people. No matter what, I thought you had a question. No, I'm like a hyper-vigilant auctioneer. Sold to the lady in the... Okay. So a brief defocus break every 60 to 90 minutes. Okay? Take a brief walk after sitting down for X minutes, depending on your need for activity. If you work at home, do some push-ups, do some squats, whatever. Have a brief fun conversation. Do something to break it up. That's micro recovery. And those are just a few. Think of other things that help you, other things that work for you that break your pace. At-home recovery that works for you. Okay. So other than this, what works for you? And what are those recovery activities that maybe like back to the exercise you used to do and you're not doing. Also, what's interesting about recovery, and I can't remember who talks about this. It might be that, if I could say his name, Csikszentmihalyi, okay, you will call that close, who wrote Flow. And he talks about how so many people, and we've all done this, after a hard day at work, they just go home and like channel surf or like wander the mall, like, The Walking Dead or something. And how that kind of zoning out or vegging out actually doesn't restore the nervous system. It's more things that are enriching to you. And I'm not doing a great job. You can like check him out.
I understood it differently. That flow, because I did a lot of research on it. Flow has to do with you have a day or you've done something fun and you don't know where the day went.
Right.
Because you were so much in the zone.
Yes, that is what. Yeah, that is what he talks about. Flow. I'm talking about something else that he talks about. Yeah, so I'm talking about the recovery.
Yeah.
Well, he's the author of Flow.
Yeah.
The book Flow. So definitely, if you want to like do the short, easy version, go to YouTube, put in Flow. Don't try to say his name or spell his name, and you can get the short version. Or I recommend reading the book Flow. It's awesome. Okay. So next steps: practice and discover micro recovery activities. Teach your clients this. Identify and implement macro recovery activities. Help your clients do the same. Can't overstate the importance of the challenge recovery cycle. And I'll just say from a personal point of view, I think that's one of the most important things that I focus on in terms of having energy, staying healthy, etc., and being in a good mood. Accessing the power of why. I'm just going to touch on this, and then we'll end off on my two favorite tools. He who has a why can endure anyhow. Nietzsche? Yeah. And back to, remember, the sweat the small stuff? One of the things that I use for myself, if I start sweating the small stuff, that's a good indication that I've lost connection with my mission, with my why. If I'm getting upset about little things, I've lost connection. Because when we feel fired up about something, again, we're not sweating the small stuff, the traffic jams, the annoying people, etc. So helping your clients get focused on their mission. What is their mission on earth? What's that path they've been called to walk? And one of my favorite quotes comes from Rumi, the Sufi philosopher. There's this one thing in this world which you must never forget to do. If you forget everything else and not this, there's nothing to worry about. But if you remember everything else and forget this, then you will have done nothing in your life. This is the part I love. It is as if a king has sent you to some country to do a task, and you perform 100 other services, but not the one he sent you to do. So human beings come to this world to do particular work. That work is a purpose, and each is specific to the person. So how do you help people do that? And I know that's kind of a tall order. Some people are more connected to their mission, others not. One of the classic ones, and good friend of mine and career coach Greg Fall reminded me of this a few years ago, where he said, I was doing some work with somebody on my own strategic vision for my life, and I mentioned the exercise that, any of you know Susanna Liller? Awesome. Yeah, that's right. Yeah, that's right. Just talked about it. Yeah, she's awesome. So she was walking me through her process, and I was sharing this with Greg. He goes, "What would you like to have on your gravestone?" And so that's one way, and it can be longer than just, they were an awesome person kind of thing. So that might be an exercise to do for yourself. What would you like on your gravestone? So next steps, reflect on your personal mission, and if you're living it, ask, what's the one thing? So that Rumi quote, that Rumi injunction, write your epitaph, help your clients do these. Last but not least, my two favorite tools. Mental tools for building resilience. Number one is instant perspective. O, having a bad day. Consider Ronald Wayne, 1976. He sold his 10% share in Apple for $800. It's now worth over $58 billion. So there's an example of instant perspective. So this tough time I'm going through is a chapter, not the whole story. So how do we help ourselves when we're in that state? How do you help clients when they're in that state? As well as how do we help ourselves when we're feeling embarrassed or frustrated or irritated and we just get hyper-focused in the moment and how we feel and we're being reactive? That's where instant perspective comes in. And I think of it sort of as like my all-purpose stress management cleaner. You know, like those all-purpose cleaners that cleans all kinds of stains? So there's 3 types. I'm going to share one type, and it's time travel. So here's the backstory when it first hit me about this approach to instant perspective. So I think I mentioned earlier that I originally wanted to be a wildlife biologist. So I saw way too many National Geographic specials. I thought that's what it was like. I could have done some informational interviews. That would have helped. So again, I grew up in Connecticut. I went to Orono in their master's program for wildlife management. And within a very short amount of time, I realized, oops, this isn't what I thought it was. I got really depressed. Just like didn't want to get out of bed in the morning, just the whole works. And I would escape to Connecticut as often as possible just to get out of there. And there was this lady back in Connecticut that I had sort of like a teenage crush on. And so when I would visit her, when I would tell her my tale of woe about what I discovered, instead of just being myself, and think about your own version of this, not just as a kid, but even as an adult, instead of just being myself, I tried to like dial up my fascination factor and like make it my stories more interesting. And so I became I tried to add some drama to it. And so you think about like maybe there's somebody in the field that you're really admire and you meet them, instead of just being yourself, you're like, make sure I come across just right, that sort of thing. And so as I'm telling her my tale of woe, again, I'm dialing up the drama factor, hoping she'll find it like incredibly fascinating. And so I tell her about how every day I'm on this roller coaster of emotion, the highs, the lows, the blah, blah, blah. And then I go what I think is the big crescendo of like the takeaway message. And I say, every day I run the whole gamut of emotions. And I come from a family that reads a lot, and so I'd read that word, but I'd never heard anybody pronounce it. Little helpful tip. Hear somebody pronounce it first. Of course, now in today's world online, you can find out real quickly. So even though I'd never heard anybody pronounce it, just like gamut, like, that doesn't sound right. So as soon as I run home, I'm not making this up, I run to my dictionary. Oh, damn it. Now what? Here's what I did. And tell me if you have not done your own version of this when you did something that was dumb. A couple things happened. Number one, I just obsessed about it. I just replayed it, and it's like, no, that kind of thing. And then I could just, if that wasn't bad enough, I pictured, like I created my own like Stephen King horror movie. I pictured her telling her friends about this moron who's like says the whole gamut. So I'm doing all of that. And if that's not bad enough, every time I went back to Connecticut and visited her, I managed to slip Gamma into the conversation. How smooth is that? And then after several times, like, I can't just keep doing this. So I said to her, like, I feel like an idiot, but, it's still, I'm bringing this up, but I still am embarrassed about that time I said I ran the whole gamut of emotions. And of course, what'd she say? Exactly. So a couple things hit me. Number one, I was not the center of her universe, which was a crushing blow to my ego. But later I'm thinking, like, here's something I obsessed about for a year and, got all upset and embarrassed about that. A, she didn't even remember. How smart was that? And then B, it's something that, like, I laugh about. Why should I torment myself all this time to get to that place? And you think about in our lives during, like we have, whether it's an irritation, an embarrassment, or something that's legitimately really painful. It's so easy to get so sucked into that. And then oftentimes, years later or months later, we're like, yeah, whatever, it's no big deal. So that's that time travel that looking back, it's like it's no big deal. Oftentimes, you think about it, if you're like me, oftentimes things that get under your skin, like a slow drive or something, that's not going to be a big deal 5 minutes from now. So why pump all like cortisol and other biochemicals of stress? Why ruin our mood if later it's going to be no biggie? And so it's great, like an hour later, a week later, a year later, to have equanimity. Why not bring it into the moment? And that's where instant perspective comes in. And it's that simple question that I know some of you use, and hopefully the story will help remind you to use it more, is that ask that question, is this going to be a big deal a year from now? Is this going to be a big deal a year from now? And if the answer is yes, then like, okay, go 5 years, whatever it takes. But again, most of the stuff, it's not going to be a big deal like later on in the day. So it's this. So do I want to ruin my day? Do I want to ruin my mood? Do I want to damage my body by being this reactive? So instant perspective. So I'd like to ask you to think about situations that get under your skin. So next steps, practice instant perspective, teach it to your clients. And then last but not least, tune your brain to see the opportunities and gifts and difficulties. So, story that hopefully makes this memorable. So years ago, I'm walking on this country road, and it was a hot September day, and I had a knee injury. I wanted to get cardio, but I had a knee injury, so I couldn't run. And so I'm speed walking. Okay, walking super fast, as fast as I can go. But here's the problem. Yeah, these little guys are on the road. Woolly bears, we called growing up. And, there's their last chance for warm sun. And they're basking in the warmth. And being an animal lover of all persuasions, I don't want the poor little guys to get crushed. But also, I'm trying to get cardio, so I don't want to be like, here, little woolly bear, like shepherd them off the road. So what I do is I take my tank top off, and as I'm walking down the road, I'm like, whoo, 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 like a big woolly bear windshield wiper. It was only years later I thought, that must have looked really strange to people. And because I love storytelling and and analogies, I'm always like everyday life. And actually, I encourage you to be mindful of everyday life experiences and asking, how could this be a teaching story? How could this be an analogy for something else? And I'll give you, those of you who are interested, on that resource page, I'll give you a link to a bunch of free stuff to help you do that. And so, again, because I'm always fascinated about everyday life and how it can be a teaching story analogy, I thought, isn't this interesting? And what a metaphor for the human experience. Because from my perspective, I'm saving their lives. But from the poor woolly bear's perspective, it's like 1 minute you're like basking in the sun, next you're getting flying into the hinterland. And how often are we like woolly bears? We lose a job, we lose a relationship, we don't get the job we want, whatever it is, and we feel like life is picking on us. And we're caught up in the drama. But if we can step back and look at it from a bigger perspective and ask, what's the gift here? What's the hidden opportunity? I'm sure some of you know, and I think now this is actually like an urban myth, at least different sites on the internet that say that, is, at least back in the day, I used to hear that the Chinese character for crisis is actually the characters of danger and opportunity combined. Let's pretend it's true, because it's cool. Okay? And when we or our clients are in the midst of crisis, it's so easy, that's the way the brain works, to focus on the danger and not the opportunity. So that's why I say tune the brain into not just, it's natural for us to tune into this is a disaster station. It doesn't take any practice for that. It's learn to practice to tune into what's the opportunity or gift. Now, one more point, just to hopefully make that hit home. How many of you know about Napoleon Hill's research at the turn of the last century? Okay. Napoleon Hill wrote a book called Think and Grow Rich, and there's also a way bigger book that it excerpted from. It's like this big, called The Laws of Success. And he interviewed people like Henry Ford, Alexander Graham Bell, Thomas Edison, etc. And he wanted to find what are the common principles that accomplished people guide their lives by. And he said, and he described this as, he said something, I won't try it because I'm going to butcher it. The takeaway message, though, was that what they recognize that most people don't is game-changing opportunity, this part I can remember, comes in the sly disguise of adversity. Game-changing opportunity comes disguised as adversity. And he believed that was so powerful, he actually required people to read the whole book and guess it. And somebody that I know who's like a super student of that, I've read it several times, but he saved me the effort of going back and said that. So teaching this skill, and this isn't just a feel-good skill, although it works to feel good. It really is a smart opportunity generating skill for ourselves and clients. And back to the mind-body connection, one of the best ways to tune into the opportunity station and the gift station is do power-ups, do things that shift your emotional state, and especially vigorous movement and music that really amps you up. So, we covered everything. Oh, we covered everything. How cool is that? So now you're official diploma carriers of Resilient You. There you go. So we've got 6 minutes. Questions about anything that we covered?